This is new footage from Operation Stream, a top secret Russian mission where they used a gas pipeline to infiltrate Ukrainian lines in Kursk. Now, Russia is mostly claiming this as a major success, but we do have the Ukrainian response here as well, which shows footage of their forces eliminating quite a few Russian soldiers as soon as they popped out the other end. We should call this out real quick, actually. So blue armbands on Russian soldiers is what you're seeing here. Throughout this conflict, Russia has worn either red or white, whereas Ukraine has worn blue and yellow to identify friend from foe. So what you're seeing here are Russian soldiers putting on blue tape to make it look like they're actually Ukrainian soldiers once they pop up behind the Ukrainian front lines. Legally dubious is probably the best way to put that. Now, at a high level here, the acting governor of the Kursk region, Alexander Kinstein, said, quote, "To get around enemy drones, mines, and equipment, the Russian armed forces used a main gas pipeline through which gas used to be supplied from Russia through Ukraine to Europe. It was a serious step. Not only is it impossible to walk there at full height, but to go bent over in uniform for a dozen kilometers. But there was also a risk of poisoning. Protective equipment was needed." Now, to give you an idea of the area we're talking about here, I'm zoomed in on Kursk on the Deep State Map tool. Zoom out a little bit to give you an idea. This is the northeastern portion of Ukraine into Russian territory. This blue area was territory held by Ukraine as of last Friday, March 7th, 2025. So this raid, this Operation Stream, took place on March 8th, on Saturday. Now, I'm going to zoom in a little bit to show you the general location of this pipeline. It's roughly through here, the middle of the screen. And we'll see so you see quite a bit of territory still held by Ukraine on Friday. And if we move that to today, clearly a big change in the Ukrainian line. So again, it looks like, based off what we know right now, the exit points for this pipeline mission were right here along this portion in the northeastern sector of Sudza. Then turning over to what we know so far, beginning with the Russian and then shifting to the Ukrainian perspective. The first series of comments here is coming from callsign Zombie, who is the commander of the Vostok Air Assault Battalion who took part in this operation. Zombie was formerly a commander of the 3rd Assault Detachment of the Wagner Group. Anyways, he says that the operation overall took 4 months to plan and execute. He says the military personnel involved included the 11th Guards Assault Brigade of the Airborne Forces, the 72nd Motorized Rifle Division, the 30th Separate Guards Motorized Rifle Brigade, the Akhmat Special Forces, volunteers from the Veterans Assault Brigade, that's a PMC or private military company, and the Vostok Brigade. So wide range of personnel that kind of lends some credibility to the idea that this was probably more than 100 people, as was initially reported. Now, Zombie says the final phase of the preparation took about 3 weeks, and during that phase, they had to pump gas out of the pipeline. My understanding is that it stopped actually operating as a gas pipeline back in January, but of course, there's probably still some remaining in those pipes. So they had to pump that out. Oxygen was pumped in, at which point he said they brought in a bunch of equipment to actually exit the tunnel at the desired point. Because remember, this pipeline doesn't just all of a sudden stop where they need to get out. They would need to break out once they're behind Ukrainian lines. He said they started to bring personnel into the tunnels as well as toilets, supplies, ammunition, and weapons. They're going to be in there for quite a while. As we get into some of these reports, it sounds like 2 to 6 days even. Like these guys, this was not a single assault that took part one morning. It was days on end that they were in this tunnel. Now, Zombie says in total, more than 800 people were trained in small groups to take part in this assault. He said the pipelines had to be crossed for about 15 kilometers, and upon exiting it, the fighters immediately secured a foothold in the industrial zone near Sudza. The enemy, the Ukrainians in this case, not expecting a maneuver, began to retreat. Then Russia Today actually reported on this as well, talking about some of the details inside the pipe. But before getting to that, a quick thank you to the sponsor of today's video. So just because your personal data is already being sold online doesn't mean this is a problem we should just ignore. In fact, there's some pretty reasonable actions we all can take to better protect ourselves and our families from these data brokers, like signing up for Delete Me, the sponsor of today's video. And if you want to know why, take a look at a recent suit brought by the FTC against Gravy Analytics, which is a company name that's hard to say with a straight face. But in this suit, they accuse this data broker firm of creating and selling inferences based off of your and my location data. So digging into this a little bit further, what they're doing is they're taking our data and they're using that to categorize us into groups based off of health conditions, family status, religion or political preferences based off of where you might have been and when. Don't like that, not one bit. And this is how data brokers today are using your and my information, which again is why tools like Delete Me are so important. Delete Me is a subscription service that constantly scans the internet, and when they find your personal data available for sale, whatever it might be, they have it removed. So I personally use Delete Me, and in just February alone, they removed 24 listings across 24 different data broker sites with 273 pieces of my personally identifiable information. So if you want to protect yourself and your family from these data brokers, get started with Delete Me today and use code Preston for 20% off all consumer plans. So in Russia Today's reporting of this operation, they said, here are the heroes who walked along the pipe for about 15 kilometers. And the RT reporter actually went into this pipeline to experience what it was like to move along. They called it a claustrophobe's dream. Dripping with sarcasm. They say it's impossible to stand up your full height, and you have to walk for kilometers and kilometers. To understand, several hundred of our fighters went behind enemy lines, more than a battalion. It's a significant force. They say the main problem in the pipe is how to breathe. The fighter engineers thought out a ventilation system, and they made holes where possible to let the air in. Again, if you're talking about a few hundred meters, it's not a big deal, but 15 kilometers, this thing doesn't have random air vents throughout. It's designed for gas. That's the opposite of what you would want in a gas pipeline. So a couple different ways that it looks like they tried to resolve this issue. They said the fighters walked in groups of 5, keeping a distance of about 10 meters. And when they stopped, they moved away from each other by 2 meters so that they could breathe normally. Moreover, the fighters figured out how to move along the pipes on some special carts. And we've got a couple different videos and pictures showing those. It does look like, as we'll see in some of the pictures here, there were some oxygen tanks that were used probably in the first group moving through this tunnel as they were setting up the ventilation system. Those do not appear, from everything I've seen, to be widespread in use amongst all of the troops. Probably just the lead element that needed that. They say the pipeline, we recall, was previously used to transit Russian gas through Ukraine. Kyiv stopped it on January 1st, 2025. They say Russian forces managed to take the enemy by surprise. They went straight to the rear and broke through the defense, liberating 8 settlements in the Kursk region. As the commander of the Special Forces, Akhmat Timso, said, quote, "The enemy met us in shorts and slippers." Now, shifting over to the Ukrainian perspective here, a couple different viewpoints. We've got the official Ukrainian response, some reporters on the ground in Kursk, and starting out here with kind of a mixed reaction from Media Zona, where they say some Russian pro-war bloggers and propagandists actually criticized the pipeline strategy as poorly planned. They said the troops reportedly crawled through the pipe for 2 days and then waited inside for 4 more days before emerging. I mean, we know that there had to be some level of coordination here because this was not the only attack happening in Kursk. There were multiple advances across multiple fronts, multiple directions against Ukrainian forces. So they had to time this just right. So these guys didn't pop out and then 3 days later, the other attacks were taking place. They say war correspondent Vladimir Romanov and propagandist Anastasia Kasharova, I'm sure I mispronounced that, criticized the operation as poorly planned, citing a lack of water, supplies, and ventilation. According to their accounts, several soldiers died underground from methane poisoning. Meanwhile, Russian servicemen and pro-war blogger Igor Guzenko argued that the premature publication of photos and videos showing soldiers crawling through the pipe had tipped off the Ukrainian side and that forces would have needed an additional week to secure a foothold. That's a valid point. We started to hear reports of this attack on Saturday, like as it was playing out. And if you're really talking about, 4, 5, 800 soldiers, like Russia is saying, it takes a while to move 800 soldiers, one at a time through this, not one at a time, but in a single file line through a tunnel like that. So it is interesting that Russia pretty quickly was so proud of this that they announced the results when, had they not done so, they maybe would have been able to exploit this a little bit further. Now, turning over to the Ukrainian response, and maybe this is the reason that Russia felt confident in saying something, because we did see that Ukraine at least had an idea as to what was happening here. Ukraine's general staff confirmed on Saturday evening that a Russian sabotage and assault group had used the pipeline to gain a foothold outside of Sudza. A Telegram post said Russian troops were detected in a timely manner and that Ukraine responded with missiles and artillery. And that's the footage that I'm going to show here. So this was also popping up on Russian Telegram channels, confirming the location of these strikes as being very near or right on top of the actual pipeline where the Russians would be popping out. So it looks like at least some of those Russian soldiers were eliminated as soon as they came above ground. Turning back to the general staff, they say, quote, currently Russian special forces are being detected, blocked, and destroyed. The enemy's losses in Sudzha are very high. And we actually have a journalist that was on the ground in Kursk Oblast, Yuri Butasov, reporting with Ukrainian Pravda, who said that around 100 Russian soldiers used the gas pipeline to reach the position of Ukraine's defense forces near the area of Sudzha on the morning of March 8th. He said, quote, the enemy used a gas pipeline and came out an area in. The precise location is concealed for security purposes, up to about 100 people. It was not a surprise, as we knew about this action, but the focus had been shifted to Kurilovka a few days prior, where other attacks had been taking place. Said the Russians had been preparing for this operation for several days, clearing the area with aerial bombs. Ukrainian Pravda does not know what happened to the Russian forces who passed through the pipeline, nor whether they managed to reach Sudzha itself. When asked why, if Ukraine knew about this operation taking place, they didn't blow up the pipe, the source said it was impossible to do that, given the logistics. Makes me think that maybe there was a hint that something like this could be happening, but if there was clear early warning, you have to believe that Ukraine would have taken more deliberate action to close this off. So maybe they got an indication right as Russians were starting to come out, or they even saw them as they were coming out and figured out what was happening and responded in time. But it's hard to believe right now that there was all that much advance warning of this actual operation taking place. But again, pretty interesting, unique footage, brand new, coming out from Operation Stream. Again, a pretty secret Russian mission using a gas pipeline to infiltrate Ukrainian lines in Kursk. But that's all I've got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.